Good morning. First, I'd like to ask everyone to mute if you haven't already muted, so Leslie's talk will not be interrupted by our phones ringing and so on. Welcome, Leslie. I'm so happy to introduce you today. 10 years ago, it was my good fortune to be seated at the same table as Leslie for an annual wing celebration. From that first meeting, we became friends. And soon our connection developed into a grandmother-granddaughter relationship. Leslie Rodriguez Vasquez is a joy in my life, and I'm so proud to introduce her to you this morning. Leslie graduated from Northfield High School in 2015. During her high school sophomore year, she was selected to attend a Department of State leadership conference in Paraguay, one of only 12 students from the United States to be chosen. That was the beginning of her love of travel. She's a person that I call a global citizen. After graduating from high school, she deferred college and spent a year in Brazil as a Rotary exchange student. Following that gap year in Brazil, Leslie began her college career at St. Olaf. During her 4 years as an OLE, she continued to take advantage of every travel opportunity offered. She was a global semester student, visiting Egypt, Tanzania, India, China, and Argentina. She spent an interim in Cuba studying, and in the summer of 2019, traveled to Puerto Rico with a few fellow students working with a St. Olaf professor. Not only did Leslie travel as a student, but she was active in campus life on the Hill too. She served as a resident assistant and was part of a group who petitioned and won approval for a first-generation house on campus. During spring break of her sophomore year, she traveled to the Texas border with fellow OLEs and worked with the group Raices to support women and children seeking asylum. In 2020, Leslie graduated from St. Olaf with honors and 3 majors: Spanish, Latin American Studies, and Political Science. For over a year, Leslie has been working as a legal assistant with immigration attorney Graham Ojala-Barber in St. Paul. In addition to working full-time, she is also studying for her LSATs that she'll be taking shortly, and has plans to be in law school next year. So, with her busy schedule, we are really fortunate that she has made the time to speak with us this morning about her experience growing up in Northfield and attending St. Olaf as the firstborn daughter of Mexican immigrants. Welcome, Leslie. It's all yours.
Thank you very much, Barb, for the lovely introduction. So I wanted to speak today to you all about my experience and my life growing up in Northfield, which is why I decided to call this Northfield Through My Eyes. And about me, this is a recap really of what Barb just mentioned. I graduated in 2015 from high school. And then I decided to take a gap year in Brazil as a Rotary exchange student, in which I ended up living in the capital city of Brasilia. And that year was actually very important in Brazil, as it was the year that the first female president, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached. And so that experience really influenced my studies at St. Olaf later on. And so then I came back and I attended St. Olaf, which I will speak a little bit more about later. And currently, like Barb mentioned, I'm a legal assistant with Graham Ojala-Barber, who's also from Northfield, as many of you know. And I am part of the Latino community in Northfield. I included the X and the E as right now those are more newer terms in our language about being gender neutral. And I don't know if many of you know, but the Latino community in Northfield began to migrate to Northfield maybe in the mid 80s and in the 90s. And so many of the people in Northfield now have been there for more than 20 years. And I am I consider it maybe like the first generation of children that were born in Northfield of many of the Mexican immigrants that are currently in Northfield. And one of my hopes in the future is to record that information and record the history of that population moving to Northfield, as it's very important and very rich as well. But basically, today, like I mentioned, I really want to talk about my experience in Northfield. And as other presenters have probably mentioned, I mean, Northfield is a great city. There's amazing opportunities as far as education and employment and just different connections with alumni at the schools and people like you all. But at the same time, there are many things that Northfield can still work on, especially in regards to accepting new communities that are different from everyone else, as well as in another presentation, someone mentioned the housing issue in Northfield, that there is not much affordable housing in which lower income communities live in the north end of town, for example. And so I wanted to be transparent in that this is my perspective and this is what I have experienced in Northfield. And so it's just one little grain of the whole experience of everyone. But I hope that it can make you all think. Especially for me, I have gone through the school system. I was part of the Compañeros and Amistades program in the schools. I've worked in town before. I worked at the tavern when I was at the high school. I also worked with Kahlo, with Maria downtown. And most recently, my last job in town was working at Judy's Floral. And so Northfield will forever be a very special place for me. But I also recognize that it has a lot of things that it can improve on and as well. And so I wanted to start off with what it was like being born and being raised in Northfield. For me, growing up and being in the schools, it was a lot of an experience of sort of living two different lives. One, because when I was in school for the most part of the day, I would be speaking English and interacting in English and focusing on my work. I always really liked school, so it was nice and fun for me to learn. But once I would get home, I would make that switch of, okay, now I have to speak Spanish so my parents can understand me. But also I had additional responsibilities of translating mail that would come to our home, or helping an uncle or an aunt make an appointment at a line of clinic. And so apart from what I had to do school-wise, I also had to do additional stuff at home. And so in some ways that would reflect maybe more on me if I was having a bad day at school. It's possible teachers may think, oh, she's not working hard enough, she's lazy, things like that. But it could be also that, no, I had all these other things that I had to worry about as being a student of color, a person of color. And another thing that I wanted to reflect on is when I would want to hang out with my friends downtown or go around walking anywhere. In some instances, when I would enter businesses with my friends, I remember being followed around or being asked if there was anything specific that I was looking for. And obviously that is good customer service, but being asked frequently, more than once, or being followed in which you really notice is something that is unfortunate, but it definitely happens. And for me, that kind of would rub in a way that, oh, maybe I'm not welcomed in this business, or maybe this owner or the people that are here don't trust me. And so that kind of reflects also on the bigger issue of if our businesses are not welcoming to others, obviously people will be avoiding certain businesses or finding it hard to shop there, knowing that maybe we're not going to be helped. So, and that would happen. I noticed that more in middle school. And so even at the age of 13, 14, I was noticing these things. And another experience for me also is being asked around town, or really anyone new that I would meet, how my English was very good. Sometimes this can be a comment, but in many instances, it can also be, oh,
and a 2015 graduate of Northfield High School.
In many instances, it can also be an insult, in that there's a certain level of English or a certain way of English that we should be speaking. And so it would throw back people when I would be like, oh no, I was born in Northfield, and that is why I speak English, or I'm in school and that is how I learned English. And so there's all these different things that, comments that can be said that we may think are nice or are comments, but in some cases it can also be insults, as far as reflecting and saying, oh, your English is really good, for example. And so that's a bit of what my childhood was like. Unfortunately, there are far worse things that have happened to other people in Northfield. And it's not my story, so I won't mention a lot of these stories, but this is just a little bit of what has happened in Northfield, and in my experience, for example. And so another time in my life that I wanted to share about is while I was in high school. I was part of the Northfield Torch group, which is, Torch stands for Tackling Obstacles and Raising College Hope. Many of you, I hope, are familiar with this program. I started this program when I was in middle school, and I went through it through high school. It first started as a program with Beth Berry, I'm sure many of you know as well, in which she wanted to address the graduation rate of Latino students in Northfield. And as that has improved drastically, it has now extended to be a program to assist first generation and low income students. And so for us, and for me, this was a program that really assisted me in getting to know how can I apply to a summer camp, or how can I apply to a college program or to college? How can I apply to the FAFSA? These were all new things and new terms and vocabulary that were being introduced to all of us during high school. And so having such a program really alleviated some of that stress, and really let me know that I can definitely apply to college just like everyone else in my school. But even though I was in this program, it still got a lot of backlash from other students, especially students that were not people of color. So for example, it was seen as, oh, they're just getting additional help, and that's not fair because they will be acing the test and we won't be, for example. Or it would be like, oh, why can't they be pulled out of class? Or different things like, why aren't they not paying for their cap and gown when we also have to pay for it? Things like that. And so those were different things that would be heard about the Torch program when I was in high school. And another thing that I remember happening a lot was when I was accepted to St. Olaf. Some of my classmates that I thought were my friends were surprised that I got into St. Olaf, or really shocked of like, what, you're going there? You applied? Things like that. And so there's a lot of reflecting too on how we think that either we don't work hard enough to receive these opportunities as well, or we were given them simply because we are people of color. And so those were kind of comments that would put me down and think like, oh, do I really deserve this opportunity? Or is it something that another student should have gotten instead? And so now I wanted to talk more about my experience at St. Olaf. It's still in Northfield, so it's a big part of Northfield as well. While I was there, like Barb mentioned, I ended up studying political science, Spanish, and Latin American studies. And I was actually one of 9 students that ended up being a triple major my graduating class. And I had initially gone to St. Olaf to major in biology and do pre-dental because I wanted to be a dentist. But like I mentioned earlier, with my experience in Brazil and seeing the protests that were happening when the president then was impeached, and realizing that all of these things overlapped of how people voted, how people acted, those really were making me think of other questions in my head. And I was like, well, let me see if political science might be a better fit. And sure enough, it really was. But another thing that is special about St. Olaf is, and the opportunity that I got to attend there, is that myself and another student actually were the first students to attend St. Olaf from the Latino population in Northfield, which is a very big honor. But it also, unfortunately, shows how long it took for such an opportunity to be accessible to students in Northfield. And another thing, again, while being at St. Olaf, was that challenge of sort of living 2 lives again. Like when I was growing up, I was really invested in my studies and doing the best that I could. But at the same time, even though I was right in Northfield, I still had to worry about my family, make sure they were doing okay, make sure they weren't missing any bills that they may have not read through or that they didn't understand. And just making sure my community was informed of news and stuff, especially as the year that I started was the 2016 presidential election. And so at St. Olaf, my experience there, I mean, it was wonderful. Yet at the same time, there are many things that St. Olaf can also work on, and in connection with the Northfield community. And so these are just some pictures from my time there while I was studying abroad and on campus. But I really appreciated the rigorous the courses that we were introduced to. But at the same time, in different circumstances, they still felt very westernized, even though we do learn a variety of cases, issues and perspectives from around the world. We still learn a very westernized and US-based education system. So we classify everything according to the US rather than maybe looking through the perspective of another country, for example. So one example could be, why does a certain government system work for that country and why can't it work for the US? But St. Olaf is also taking very good steps, including their race and ethnic studies department that they now have, and having different race and ethnic studies classes being introduced, as well as introducing more professors of color, as well as more international students and more domestic students, which is really nice to see. But at the same time, even though all of these new things are happening, sometimes different actions that are occurring on campus are not being held accountable. So for example, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, when something comes up in class and a student may say, I don't know, something problematic, for example, this would happen a lot in my political science classes, where different perspectives would be brought up, and if it pertained to a certain population, say at St. Olaf, so maybe attacking the Latino population, sometimes professors wouldn't really address it or kind of brush it under the rug, or when students say, oh, well, for example, they said the N word, so why can't I say the N word? And things like that wouldn't be really red flagged in class. But obviously there are professors and there are different situations to address them. But having these things not addressed can lead to bigger issues and bigger problems. And this kind of led to what happened my first year as well, when there was major protests on campus, as you all may remember. Students of color, specifically African Americans, were being attacked on campus. And it didn't help either that this was during the 2016 presidential election. So in a way, I think St. Olaf was a microorganism of what was happening as a country and as a whole. Kind of two very polarized sides on campus and views. And this really led to things being said on campus. And so here are different comments that I heard on campus. And the first one was actually given to me. It was during my first year. I had several classes with a student, and I thought we were getting close and we were being good friends. And I'm pretty sure I had introduced myself saying I was from Northfield and I liked the city and I really liked growing up there. And it wasn't until maybe a couple of weeks later, I don't know how we started talking, but she generalized and just mentioned, oh, I thought you were from Chicago this entire time and I never thought you were from Northfield. And so this was an issue in that she was generalizing that maybe most Latino students were coming from such a big city like Chicago, or thinking that, oh, there could never be a Latina in Northfield, and why would she be from Northfield? What is she doing here in the first place, kind of thing. So that really surprised me and took me back. And another comment that I heard on campus that actually a friend of mine heard or experienced herself, and she let me use this, was while walking to class, she was yelled at to go back to Mexico. And she is not a Mexican student. She's actually Salvadorian. And so first off, that again kind of generalizes the situation of, oh, maybe all brown people or Latino looking people are from Mexico. And so that was really unfortunate for her. And another instance, like I experienced myself too, is your English is really good on campus. And this would happen to a lot of my international student friends on campus, especially when we would have visitors from off campus. This happened to one of my friends while she was working at the bookstore on campus in Bunchrock. It again reiterates that there's maybe a certain level of English or a certain way of English that one should speak. And it really, again, makes you think of, oh, maybe I'm not welcome here, or maybe I should work on my English, when in reality, no, we shouldn't be accommodating to certain standards of how we should be speaking, how we should be acting. And so those are little things, sorry, not little things, big things that happened on campus that I remember and that I reflect on. And lastly, I have this slide for all of us to reflect on, and what we can do to help in Northfield. I think one of the big things is that even myself, to not be afraid to criticize ourselves on what the different things that we say or the different interactions that we have. For me, like I mentioned, I really appreciate Northfield and all the things that I have experienced. Yet at the same time, I recognize that there are many things that Northfield can still work on. And there are also things that me as a person of color can work on to understand other communities. But also the majority of our population in Northfield is white, and there are things that community can be critical of themselves, but also be helping our community in a way. So I included some questions here to sort of reflect on when we may hear certain things in the future. So for example, one thing is that I hear often is, oh, where are you from? So for example, that was said to me on campus. And so you can reflect on, why did I ask that? Is it because I think they should be from a certain place? Is it because I think they have such a standard, so they might be from somewhere else? And we kind of detach ourselves from thinking, oh, why did I not think they're from here? Or why did I not think they could share the same experience as me? And so another question we can also ask ourselves is, could my student or family member or community member have more responsibilities than I think? And so that again is how I felt growing up, that apart from schoolwork that I had to do, I also had to think about other things as far as responsibilities at home, thinking about how, okay, maybe a student again is having a bad day, and so I shouldn't really automatically think, oh, they're a bad student, they don't work hard enough. No, it may be other things that the student of color or this community member of color is going through. And lastly, another question that I wanted you all to reflect on is, how can you all use your privileges to assist others? So for example, maybe one of you is really good at, I don't know, knitting or providing different services. And maybe sometimes in my community, it's not a big thing, but maybe we can do an event like that in which we can bring both of the populations together and show how you have a certain skill and how we have maybe a different skill, and how we can bring those together to work together and get to know each other more, and kind of start bringing more of these walls down of why we think of certain things when we think of a Latino in Northfield, for example. And yes, I wanted to leave you all with those questions to reflect. Lastly, I just wanted to include my contact information. If you all wanted to speak more, I am very flexible, getting on a phone, getting together for coffee, although my schedule is a bit different right now, but or an email as well. Again, I wanted to repeat how this is just one experience in Northfield, and how I really appreciate Northfield. And although I've traveled all over the world, I always come back to Northfield. So it holds a really special place in my heart, which is why I think that it should really improve, and that we have a lot of things to work on still. But I appreciate that groups like you all are getting together and thinking about these things, because that is the first step to start improving a town like Northfield. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. Let's unmute to give her a nice round of applause. So now muted. I see that we have comments in the chat, but we don't have questions yet. But please add your question. If you right now have a question and would just like to raise your hand while someone else puts one in the chat, go ahead and do that. But let's remain muted, except for if someone has a question right now. One, I would like to ask you, Leslie, you talked about affordable housing and that being such an issue. I've also heard, and I'm wondering if you have any insights about how difficult it is for working with banks in getting loans. And I'm wondering if you have anything to say about that.
Yes. Well, personally, assisting other families and my own family, it can be difficult, especially as certain loans can require a social security number, for example. And a big part of the Norfolk community is undocumented, in which they entered the US without documentation or without permission. And so in a way, it's like people are living in the shadows. And so not having legal status in the US and in Northfield can really impact getting a loan, like you said, or really even starting a bank account. But that obviously is an additional barrier of why, in addition to why housing is not affordable, can also make it more difficult to be more accessible to others.
Have there been any improvements in that? Are there other ways that loans can be gotten other than with social security numbers? Are there any improvements?
I don't know of any improvements drastically, but there are certain banks that, each bank is different. So there are banks that don't have such requirements, and so those are easier to access. But also that information of knowing which bank allows that and the language barrier of understanding exactly what a contract may entail of having a loan is also difficult to understand.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the chat? Let's see.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm an English teacher, an ESL English teacher, I should say, for adults. And I've been wondering why the classes are so small in light of the large population. And I'm wondering if there's anything that we can do to help people learn the English language, and that's assuming they want to. Is there some block that we could remove? And then the other thing is that there were some questions brought up in our church about having a language swap, and I'm kind of wondering if that's something that could be used, where we would have people in our church learning Spanish along with people learning English, that type of thing. I don't know how that would work at all. I mean, I've really not put a lot of thought into how it would work, but we're just thinking about the opportunity.
Okay, yeah.
Just dual question, kind of.
I think, I'm not sure, I can't give you a good answer, but my perspective is that the hours sometimes is really difficult, especially as most people work maybe a 9-to-5 job or even more past 5. And so if classes are offered in the morning, it's very difficult to attend those. And if they are offered in the evening, maybe it's too late in the evening for having dinner ready and getting kids ready for bed and things like that. And so I think it is difficult just knowing how schedules can align, but also knowing that we have a lot of other responsibilities to take care of, in which I'm sure a lot of people would want to learn English and would want to take the time, but unfortunately, there is no time. But like you mentioned, I think there are other activities, maybe after Sunday Mass or things like that, where a lot of a big majority of the Latino population may go to. That is just an idea that popped into my head right now.
You mean that's for us to learn Spanish?
Oh, yes. But also more of making English classes accessible to others. But yes, even attending Spanish Mass, St. Dominic's is the main church that offers that. Or also, although there can be a language barrier, it is really welcoming to know that people can take the effort when you see someone, say at the grocery store or downtown. That's a way to introduce yourself and possibly being invited to other events, parties, family parties. Yeah, which is things that one can do in a day-to-day.
So I'm not exactly understanding that. So if we see somebody who's speaking Spanish or hear somebody speaking Spanish, we would, like, I have a card for our classes, and I've talked to people about the classes, saying, we have these classes if you're interested.
Mhm.
But I don't know if that's presumptive. You know what I mean? And I do
Right, right.
understand the time crunch that Latino or Spanish speaking neighbors are really under a big, huge time crunch. And I understand that. Is there any fear of documentation for those classes?
I'm not sure from my perspective, but
Mhm.
it's possible, but I couldn't speak on that. Sorry.
There is a comment that Mar made on about documentation. Let's see, no, I've just lost it. I have to move up a bit. And then there are a couple of questions on the chat too. Mar says, thank you, Leslie. Comment, undocumented is such a misnomer since it is not the people that don't have documents. They have more than the average US individual, but none of their documents are issued in the US. But it is definitely better than calling people illegal. And then the next question is, what are the barriers to getting college university scholarships? How can things be changed now?
Well, through my experience, a lot of it is just the information being accessible to students. And so fortunately with programs like Torch, a lot of scholarships are introduced to us right away or mentioned to us in a certain way. But unfortunately, only so many people can qualify for scholarships. And so if someone doesn't have legal status that wants to apply to college, maybe they are not qualified to apply for a certain scholarship. But I think when such opportunities come up with scholarships being available, it's really important to share those as much as one can. Now with social media, when I see different things like that, I try to make sure and share them, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram, because now I think there's a lot more scholarships available nationwide that anyone can apply to, which is really nice. But when I was growing up, a lot of our scholarships were local, and so different businesses that were offering scholarships. And so in that, I think Northfield is doing good in sharing those opportunities and also having programs like Torch really advertising those opportunities.
But I asked that question, Leslie, because I was a mentor to Roberto Limon. I'm an artist and he is a wonderful artist. And I worked with him at the high school many, many times. He even painted a mural on the Spanish teacher's wall and so on. Anyway, we had it was probably, I'm trying to remember how long ago, maybe 10 years ago now. He's in the Twin Cities now, but there was no opportunity in the States for him to go to art school any place, state universities or private. He was not born in this country. His family had immigrated up here and had been in Northfield for a long time, since he was in middle school. But anyway, we were just really frustrated because he had all the credentials and that wonderful portfolio, but we could not get him into any art school. So I was just wondering how that had changed. So your answer is helpful, that things are progressing.
The next question is, are most Latinos in Northfield Catholic?
I think from the people that I know, the majority are, but obviously there's different people within the community that also practice other religions. But a good chunk is, from what I believe and from what the people that I know do, are consider themselves Catholic.
Which then leads me to the question that many of us are part of Bethel Lutheran Church. We're in the northwest corner, and how could we be more welcoming to the Latino community?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that I can think about, but I think the main one is just being welcoming, whether it's hosting different events or being willing to invite people to the church or to the community. I think for me personally, it just takes a personal invitation for knowing that someone additional in my community wants to know more about me or wants to get to know me. That is really beneficial, and it makes me want to trust more people in Northfield. But yeah, any events that is hosted or any programs, sort of like how you all are doing and inviting other people from other churches and other cities maybe to participate. But again, the language barrier is one of the big things. But again, I think as our population moves on, I think some people are getting the grasp of some of the English language. Obviously, there are people that speak English, but there are still some that are not very comfortable with English.
So amazing when you mentioned the personal invitation, because that's such an important thing for almost everything, isn't it? Then there's the next is a comment. Congratulations for your triple major at St. Olaf. You are truly an inspiration. Thank you for being transparent in, transparent in sharing your experiences in Northfield. I hear you. Do you know of policies here in Northfield that continue to make it difficult for Latinx people to experience the possibilities and opportunities available here?
I'm not aware of specific policies. Just through my experience, it is just a lot. What happens a lot and what makes it difficult is just that cultural barrier and that language barrier for the most part. I'm sure maybe some other people that works more closer with the city could talk more about the policies, but for me, just a big difficulty is that big barrier of language and culture, and then just the prejudices that we may have for a certain community, which keeps us kind of apart and away from each other. So.
I see that Carol Lisney has had her hand up for a really long time.
Oh.
So Carol, maybe it's your turn.
Sorry, Carol.
That's okay. I just wanted to thank you for sharing everything that you have shared. And it's truly impressive that you have managed worldwide travel and experience and are willing to share that. I'm wondering, going back to St. Olaf, because I appreciate the fact that, triple majors, and on the side, you have said I had family responsibilities at the same time. And so I'm wondering whether you lived on campus or whether you lived at home. And I'm wondering whether your living situation helped or hindered trying to get everything done.
Yeah, so I lived on campus for the whole time that I was there, except for one semester. When I got back from global semester, I decided to live at home because it was just a lot cheaper. But I did spend all my time on campus. And for me, actually, it was something that really strengthened my experience at St. Olaf. I think that one of the big parts is why I succeeded and did good in classes is because I had my community right next to me. It was always fun going home and kind of speaking of what I was learning about or mentioning to an aunt or uncle about what I was learning. It was always fun to see just kind of through them what I was learning and them kind of understanding the different topics that we cover. But through them, they would be like, oh, well, keep going. Like, you're already this far. And so please continue because you're doing this for all of us. And that would be the same for different members. Maybe when I would go to church or who I would see downtown. It really kind of was more of a motivation for me to continue and do the different things that I was involved in on campus. So I really appreciate that I was could be on campus, but also detach myself from campus in a bit, yet still be strengthened through my family and community members to continue being in school.
Well, it's amazing to me that when people are able to do this and spread the table out in front of them and say, I've got this today and I've got this today, and they mix, and this is how it's going to go. And you learn to integrate everything that you have responsibility for. And as a result of that, I think you also enable yourself to look way beyond whatever the trouble of the day is, and to work through that and keep going. So good for you. That's just really a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Are there any further questions?
There's another comment that Mar has, Connie.
Okay, go ahead and read it, Barb. Oh, okay. I don't see it, so go ahead.
I can comment on it
Okay.
if you want. I was just the comment is that what Leslie was talking about, the kids having to do all these other extra things of reading mail, navigate the health system, the banks, and all of that. We really need, many of us think that we should have a network of people that speak Spanish and offer that kind of teaming up with families. And so families will trust these other people and they can help them with applying for the Alina Cares program, for instance, or how do you do this? How do you go to the bank and ask for this and that? And have this people that they're white people in town so they can navigate and help. And the trend should be into more bilingual stuff everywhere. Is really welcoming to have bilingual people at the banks, at the clinics, at the schools, everywhere. And the very problematic trend is in health settings is that they're moving away from people into, because it saves money, into those virtual interactions that so many people find them really lacking, especially if you are in a health situation. But in any event, these people trying to navigate both languages have to be really proficient. Sometimes people don't know Spanish well, and they're placed in the position of translating or interpreting, and it can go really well, really poorly, and be even harmful if it's in a setting, in a health setting, for instance. But what Leslie was describing, that's a burden on the kids that we should try to unload as much as we can.
Thank you, Mar. Leslie, is there anything else that you would like to add before you leave? We don't want to keep you longer than an hour. We know that we are taking you from work, and we so appreciate your being here.
Thank you. No, I just really want to thank Mar as well, because that is exactly what myself and other children have gone through and continue to go through unless the problem is addressed, hopefully. So.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for being here today. You have been a real inspiration. You have given us food for thought, things to chew on, and things to work on, as well as an amazing story of an amazing young woman. So thank you very much.